It was one of those perfect Saturday afternoons when the sun wasn't too hot, and there was just enough breeze to make everything feel right. David was at Riverside Park with his little girl, Sophie. She was 6 years old and full of energy, running around the playground like she'd been saving it up all week. David sat on a bench nearby, keeping one eye on her while unwrapping the turkey sandwich he'd been looking forward to since breakfast. He'd been up since 5 that morning, working his shift at the warehouse. Then he'd rushed home, changed clothes, picked up Sophie from his neighbor's place, and drove straight to the park. This was their special time together, just the two of them. No work calls, no worrying about bills, just father and daughter enjoying the afternoon. Sophie was on the swings now, pumping her legs and squealing every time she went high. David smiled, taking a moment to just watch her. These moments made everything worth it. The long hours, the tiredness, the struggles, all of it disappeared when he saw that smile on her face. But then something caught his attention. Under the big oak tree on the far side of the playground, there was a little girl sitting all alone. She wasn't playing. She wasn't reading or waiting for someone. She was just sitting there with her knees pulled up to her chest, and even from a distance, David could tell she was crying. He looked around for parents or guardians, but saw no one paying attention to her. The other families were busy with their own kids. David wrapped his sandwich back up and walked over, his dad instincts kicking in. No child should be alone and crying in a park. As he got closer, he realized something was different about this girl. Her skin had this strange shimmer to it, almost like tiny scales that caught the light. Her eyes were an unusual shade of purple, and when she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, he noticed her hands had the same scale-like pattern. For a second, David froze. He'd never seen anything like this before, but then he saw past the unusual appearance and just saw what was really there. A scared, hungry, lost child who needed help. "Hey there," David said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl flinched at first, like she expected him to yell or run away. But when David didn't move, just stayed there with a concerned look on his face, she tried to speak. Her voice came out mixed with strange clicking sounds, and her words were broken and hard to understand. "Lost. Hungry. Don't know. Where?" she managed to say between sobs. David's heart broke. He didn't understand what was going on with her appearance, and honestly, it didn't matter right then. Here was a child in trouble, and that was all he needed to know. "It's okay, you're safe now," he told her gently. He pulled out his sandwich and offered it to her. "Here, you must be starving. Take this." The girl's purple eyes went wide. She looked at the sandwich, then at David, then back at the sandwich like she couldn't believe what was happening. Her small hands reached out slowly, almost afraid he might take it back. When he nodded encouragingly, she grabbed it and started eating like she hadn't had food in days. David pulled out his water bottle too. "Here, drink some water. Slowly though, you don't want to choke." He sat down on the grass next to her, not too close to make her uncomfortable, but close enough that she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Sophie had noticed him and was running over, curious about what was happening. "Daddy, who's that?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with curiosity when she saw the strange girl. "This is..." David realized he didn't know her name. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl swallowed her food and said something that sounded like Lyra, mixed with some clicking sounds. David went with Lyra. "This is Lyra, and she's lost. We're going to help her find her family, okay?" Sophie, being 6 and wonderfully innocent, just smiled. "Hi, Lyra, do you want to play after you eat?" The girl named Lyra looked shocked that Sophie wasn't afraid of her. A small smile appeared on her face through the tears. She nodded. David pulled out his phone to call the police and report a lost child, but something weird happened. His phone kept dropping the call. The signal would just disappear every time he tried. He tried 3 times before giving up for the moment. "Okay, let's try a different approach," David said. He looked at Lyra, who was finishing the sandwich. "Do you remember anything about where you came from? Any landmarks or street names?" Lyra shook her head, fresh tears forming in her eyes. She said something in that strange language of clicks and whistles, but David could tell from her face that she was completely lost. Not just lost in the park, but lost in a way that suggested she was far from home, really far. What David didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that at that very moment, thousands of miles above the Earth's atmosphere, someone was watching everything. Through technology so advanced it might as well be magic. Queen Zaraya was observing every moment of this interaction from her spaceship. The Queen's hands gripped the armrests of her command chair as she watched this human man offer his food to her daughter. Her daughter, the Princess Lyra, who had accidentally activated an escape pod during their secret mission near Earth and had crashed in this park hours ago. Zariah had been searching frantically, her entire fleet on alert. They'd found Lyra quickly enough, but then Zariah had seen this human approaching, and something made her wait. Something made her watch instead of immediately retrieving her daughter. Now, seeing this simple act of kindness, this human giving away his only food to a strange child without hesitation, Zariah felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Her people, the Draconians, were warriors. They were conquerors. They were proud and strong, and they did not show weakness. Helping someone who couldn't help you in return was considered foolish. But watching David sit with Lyra, offering comfort with no expectation of reward, no knowledge of who she really was, no hope of gaining anything from this encounter, the Queen felt her worldview beginning to crack. "Your Majesty," her second-in-command said from behind her, "we should retrieve the princess immediately. This human has seen too much already." But Queen Zariah held up one clawed hand, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Wait," she commanded. "I want to see what he does next." Back in the park, David was trying his phone again while Sophie sat next to Lyra, showing her a toy she'd brought. The signal still wouldn't work. He frowned, wondering if there was something wrong with the network in this area. "All right," David said, making a decision. "Lyra, I'm going to take you to the police station myself. They'll help us find your family. Is that okay?" Lyra nodded, and for the first time since he'd found her, she spoke in clear English. "Thank you." Those two simple words, said with such genuine gratitude, made David smile. "You don't have to thank me, kiddo. Any decent person would do the same thing." But high above Earth, Queen Zariah knew that wasn't true at all. Most beings, human or otherwise, wouldn't have done what this man just did, and that realization changed everything. The massive spaceship hung silently in orbit, invisible to every telescope and radar system on Earth. Inside the command center, Queen Zariah sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing David loading both children into his old car. Her military advisors stood in a semicircle behind her, growing more agitated by the minute. "My queen, we must act now," Commander Thax insisted, his scales rippling with frustration. "The human has taken Princess Lyra. This is an abduction by their standards. We should retrieve her immediately and eliminate any witnesses." Zariah's tail twitched, the only sign of her inner turmoil. "No one will be eliminated, Commander. But the protocols—" "I am well aware of our protocols," Zariah said sharply, finally turning to face her officers. Her purple eyes, so similar to her daughter's, flashed with authority. "I created half of them myself, but I am choosing to observe further." The other officers exchanged worried glances. This wasn't like their queen at all. Zariah was known throughout the Draconian Empire as the Iron Monarch, the one who'd never lost a battle, who'd expanded their territory across 12 systems, who showed no mercy to enemies and expected absolute strength from her people. Yet here she was, watching a random human male drive away with her only child, and she was choosing to do nothing. "Your Majesty, forgive my boldness," said General Kree, the oldest of her advisors, "but I must speak plainly. You are emotionally compromised. Your daughter is safe, she is unharmed. We should retrieve her and leave this system at once." Zariah stood up to her full height of 7 feet, her armor gleaming under the ship's lights. "What I am, General, is curious. This human, this David, he gave away his only meal. He is clearly not wealthy. His vehicle is old, his clothes are worn, yet he helped Lyra without hesitation, without knowing who she was or what she was. He expected nothing in return." "That only proves his stupidity," Thax muttered. "Does it?" Zariah walked to the view screen, placing one clawed hand against it. "Or does it prove something we've forgotten? When was the last time any of you helped someone weaker than yourselves without calculating the benefit first?" The silence in the command center was deafening. Zariah had been reviewing David's life through their advanced scanning systems. What she'd found intrigued her more than she wanted to admit. David Rodriguez was 34 years old. He'd lost his wife Hannah 3 years ago in a car accident. Since then, he'd been raising Sophie alone while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. His bank account showed he was barely scraping by. His medical records showed exhaustion and stress. Yet his social media and communication records showed a man who never missed Sophie's school events, who volunteered at her school when he could, who always found time to make his daughter smile. By draconian standards, David was nobody. No wealth, no power, no status. In their society, he would be considered weak, barely worth noticing. But Zariah couldn't stop watching him. There was something about the way he'd knelt down to Lyra's level, the gentle tone of his voice, the patience in his eyes. On the screen, David was pulling up to a police station. Zariah watched him unbuckle both girls and walk them inside. She listened through their audio surveillance as David explained the situation to the desk officer. "I found this child alone in Riverside Park about an hour ago. She seems lost and doesn't speak much English. I tried calling it in, but my phone wasn't working properly. I thought it was better to bring her here directly." The police officer looked at Lyra with obvious confusion. Her unusual appearance was hard to miss. "And you are?" "David Rodriguez. Here's my ID. I'm happy to provide any information you need. I just want to make sure she gets back to her family safely." Zariah made a decision. She activated their reality manipulation technology, something they rarely used as it required enormous energy. Within seconds, she'd planted false memories in the minds of everyone in that police station. They now believed Lyra was the child of diplomatic visitors from a foreign nation, that she had a rare genetic condition affecting her appearance, and that her guardians would collect her shortly. "We'll take it from here. Mr. Rodriguez," the officer said, his voice slightly monotone as the implanted memories took hold. "Thank you for bringing her in. You're free to go." David looked hesitant. He glanced down at Lyra, who had grabbed onto Sophie's hand. "Will she be okay? I mean, does she have somewhere to go tonight?" "Her family will be here within the hour," the officer assured him, reading from the false information now in his system. David knelt down one more time, putting himself at eye level with Lyra. "You're going to be just fine, okay? Your family is coming to get you. You're safe now." Lyra's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of fear. She threw her small arms around David's neck, hugging him tightly. David looked surprised but hugged her back gently, patting her head. "It's okay, kiddo. You're brave, you know that? Really brave." Sophie hugged Lyra too. "Bye, Lyra. I hope you're not lost anymore." As David and Sophie left the police station, Zariah felt something strange in her 3 hearts. Humans only had 1 heart, she knew. Draconians had 3, each serving a different purpose. 1 for courage, 1 for wisdom, 1 for power. Right now, all 3 of her hearts were beating in an unfamiliar rhythm. "Begin Phase 2, Zariah commanded suddenly. Her officers stared at her. "Phase 2, Your Majesty? I want to know more about this human. Arrange for Princess Lyra to encounter him again tomorrow. Make it seem coincidental. I want to see if this behavior was an anomaly or if he truly is different." "My queen, this is highly irregular. So is a human showing more honor than most draconians I've met," Zariah snapped. "Make it happen, and expand our surveillance to include his home, his workplace, everywhere he goes. I want to understand what makes him this way." Commander Thax stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty, may I ask what you hope to gain from this?" Zariah turned back to the view screen, watching David buckle Sophie back into the car. The little girl was talking excitedly, probably about their adventure. David was smiling at her, all his tiredness seeming to melt away when he looked at his daughter. "Perhaps nothing," Zariah admitted quietly, "or perhaps everything. Our empire has conquered star systems, Commander. We've defeated enemies that would make humans' nightmares seem pleasant. We're strong, we're powerful, we're feared across the galaxy. But when was the last time we were kind? When was the last time we helped someone simply because it was right?" She didn't wait for an answer. David helped Lyra because it was the right thing to do. Not because it benefited him. Not because she could offer him anything. Not because anyone was watching or would reward him. Just because a child needed help. That's a kind of strength we don't have, and I want to understand it. The officers remained silent. Some looked confused, others concerned. None dared to argue with their queen when she used that tone. Over the next 6 hours, Zariah watched David's evening routine through their surveillance. She saw him return to his small apartment, cook a simple dinner, help Sophie with her homework, give her a bath, read her 3 bedtime stories, and tuck her in with such obvious love it made Zariah's chest ache. After Sophie was asleep, she watched David sit at his kitchen table, paying bills on his ancient laptop. She saw his face fall as he looked at the numbers. She watched him put his head in his hands for a moment, overwhelmed. But then he took a deep breath, straightened up, and kept going. This human was struggling. By any objective measure, his life was difficult. Yet he'd given away his lunch without a second thought. He'd spent hours helping a strange child when he probably needed that time for himself. Queen Zariah had ruled her empire for 20 years. She'd made decisions that affected billions of lives. She'd never second-guessed herself, never doubted her path. But watching David Rodriguez live his simple, difficult, beautiful human life, she found herself questioning everything she'd ever believed about strength, about power, about what truly mattered. "Tomorrow," she said softly to the empty command center, most of her officers having retired for their sleep cycle. "We will see if this was real or just a fortunate accident." But deep in her three hearts, she already knew the answer. She'd watched him for hours. This was who David was, not just what he did. And that terrified her more than any enemy she'd ever faced because it meant everything she'd built her life on might be wrong. Sunday morning came with golden sunlight streaming through David's apartment windows. Sophie bounced into his room at 7 o'clock, which was actually sleeping in by her standards, and jumped on his bed. Daddy, can we go to the park again? Please?" David groaned, pulling the pillow over his head. He'd been up past midnight finishing work emails and trying to figure out how to pay both the electric bill and Sophie's upcoming school trip fee on his current budget. But when he peeked out from under the pillow and saw Sophie's hopeful face, he couldn't say no. "All right, Bug. Let me make breakfast first, okay?" An hour later, they were back at Riverside Park. Sophie ran straight to the swings while David followed with a backpack containing snacks, water, and his first aid kit. He always brought the first aid kit after. Sophie had scraped her knee badly last month, and he'd had nothing to help her with. He'd just sat down on their usual bench when something made him look toward the old oak tree. His heart sank. There, in the exact same spot as yesterday, was Lyra. She was crying again, and this time he could see her arm was hurt. There was blood on her sleeve, and she was cradling it against her chest. What the? David was up and moving before he finished the thought. This couldn't be a coincidence. Where were the diplomatic family that was supposed to pick her up? Why was she back here? And more importantly, why was she hurt? "Lyra!" he called out as he approached. The girl looked up, and her face lit up with recognition despite her tears. She tried to say his name, but it came out mixed with those clicking sounds again. David knelt beside her, immediately going into dad mode. "Let me see your arm, sweetie." "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Lyra hesitantly extended her injured arm. David carefully rolled up her sleeve and winced. There was a nasty gash running along her forearm, cutting through both her human-looking skin and the strange scales. It wasn't bleeding too heavily now, but it looked like it hurt terribly. "Okay, I've got you. Just hold still for me." David pulled out his first aid kit and started cleaning the wound as gently as he could. Lyra whimpered but didn't pull away. She watched him work with those big purple eyes, like she couldn't quite believe he was helping her again. What David didn't notice was how the scales around the wound started to shimmer and change color, going from their usual iridescent shade to a soft blue, then back again. High above, Queen Zariah leaned forward in her command chair, fascinated. Lyra's scales were responding to David's kindness, showing emotional colors that the Queen had rarely seen from her daughter. Blue meant trust, safety, comfort. Sophie came running over, her face full of concern. "Lyra, you're back." "But you're hurt. Daddy, we have to help her." "I am helping her, Bug. Can you get me the big bandage from the kit? The one with the cartoon characters?" Sophie dug through the first aid kit and pulled out a large adhesive bandage covered in cheerful little dinosaurs. David carefully applied it after making sure the wound was clean. It looked ridiculous against Lyra's scaled skin, but it would protect the injury. There we go. All better. Well, it'll be better soon anyway. David sat back, studying Lyra with concern. What happened? "Why are you here again? Where are the people who were supposed to pick you up?" Lyra looked down, fresh tears rolling down her scaled cheeks. She said something in her language that David couldn't understand, but he didn't need a translation to hear the fear and loneliness in her voice. David pulled out his phone to call the police again. Same as yesterday, his signal kept cutting out. He tried 4 times, walking to different spots in the park, but it was like something was blocking his calls. He didn't know that Queen Zariah was actively interfering, continuing her test. "This is ridiculous," David muttered. He looked at his watch. It was almost noon. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with hope and fear mixed in her expression. He looked at Sophie, who was holding Lyra's good hand. David made a decision that would have made his practical side scream. He was already stretched thin. His apartment was tiny. He was barely managing to take care of Sophie and himself. Taking in another child even temporarily was crazy. It might even be illegal. But looking at this scared, hurt little girl, he knew he couldn't leave her alone. Not again. "All right," he said, surprising himself with his own certainty. "Lyra, how would you feel about coming home with me and Sophie? Just until we can get this sorted out. I promise I'll keep trying to find your family, but I can't leave you here alone. Especially not when you're hurt." Lyra's eyes went wide. She looked at Sophie, who nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, come to our house. We can share my toys and watch movies and—" "Sophie, breathe," David said with a gentle laugh. He looked back at Lyra. "What do you say? Will you come with us?" Aboard her ship, Queen Zaraya held her breath. She hadn't interfered with Lyra's ability to refuse or accept. This was her daughter's choice. What would Lyra do? Lyra nodded slowly, then more firmly. She stood up, still cradling her bandaged arm, and reached for David's hand with her good one. Sophie immediately took her other hand, and the three of them walked toward David's car like that, hand in hand in hand. The Queen sat back, her mind reeling. He'd done it again, with even more risk to himself this time. Taking an unknown injured child into his home could bring legal troubles, social services investigations, not to mention the practical challenges. But David had looked at Lyra and only seen a child who needed help. He's either the most foolish human on that planet or the most extraordinary, Commander Thax observed from his station. Perhaps both, Zaraya murmured. Continue monitoring. And Thax? Prepare medical supplies that appear human-made. Make sure Lyra's wound heals faster than it would naturally. She should be well by tomorrow, but David shouldn't know we helped. He should believe his simple first aid worked. Understood, Your Majesty. At David's apartment, the real challenge began. He showed Lyra the bathroom, helped her clean up properly, and found some of Sophie's old clothes that might fit her. They were a bit small, but better than Lyra's torn outfit. "Sophie, can Lyra borrow some of your clothes for now? We'll go get her some that fit better tomorrow. She can have whatever she wants." Sophie was already pulling out her favorite shirts to show Lyra. David made grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, watching as Lyra ate carefully, like she was afraid he might take the food away. It broke his heart. What had this kid been through? After lunch, he set Lyra up on the couch with blankets and pillows. "You can rest here, okay? If you need anything, just call for me. I'll be right in the kitchen." But Lyra didn't rest. She watched David as he moved around the small apartment, doing dishes, folding laundry, helping Sophie with a puzzle. She watched him like she was studying him, trying to understand something complex. When evening came, David made spaghetti, one of the few meals he could make in bulk cheaply. He served all three of them equal portions, sitting at their small table. Sophie chattered away about school, about her friends, about a funny video she'd seen. Lyra listened, occasionally making those clicking sounds that might have been laughter. "Tomorrow is Monday," David said, more to himself than anyone. "I have to work. Sophie has school." He looked at Lyra. "I'll call the authorities again from my work phone. Maybe that one will work better. And I'll take you both to the doctor if your arm isn't looking better." Lyra touched her bandaged arm and said softly, "Thank you." David smiled. "You're welcome, kiddo. We'll figure this out, I promise." That night, after getting both girls ready for bed, David read them the same 3 stories he'd read to Sophie the night before. Lyra curled up on the couch-turned bed, clutching one of Sophie's stuffed animals, and for the first time since crashing on Earth, she felt truly safe. In orbit, Queen Zaraya watched her daughter fall asleep with a peaceful expression. When was the last time Lyra had looked that peaceful? Life in the royal palace was full of training, lessons, expectations, and pressure. Lyra had everything material she could want. But she'd never had what this simple human was giving her, unconditional kindness with no expectations attached. And David, sitting at his kitchen table after both girls were asleep, looked at his budget spreadsheet and sighed. Adding another mouth to feed meant cutting something else. Maybe he could take on extra hours at the warehouse. Maybe he could skip a few meals himself. But looking at the couch where Lyra slept peacefully, he knew he'd made the right choice. Queen Zaraya watched this simple human sacrifice his own comfort for her daughter, and felt her worldview continue to crack. David had nothing to gain from this. Lyra wasn't his responsibility. No one would blame him for calling authorities and leaving her at the police station. But he'd chosen compassion over convenience, chosen kindness over comfort. What kind of world raises humans like this? Zariah wondered aloud. And what kind of empire have I built that would consider this weakness? She had no answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't leaving Earth until she understood David Rodriguez completely. And perhaps, though she barely admitted it to herself, she didn't want to leave at all. The week that followed was chaos wrapped in the warmest kind of love David had ever experienced since losing Hannah. Monday morning started with the realization that he now had to get 2 children ready for the day instead of 1, and Lyra didn't have proper clothes, shoes, or any documentation that would let her attend school with Sophie. David called his boss at the warehouse from his work cell phone, explaining he'd be late due to a family emergency. Then he took both girls to the local community center, where a kind social worker named Betty listened to his story with increasingly wide eyes. "So you just found her twice, and you brought her home?" Betty looked at Lyra, who was holding Sophie's hand and staying close to David. "Mr. Rodriguez, you understand this is highly unusual?" "I know," David said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "I kept trying to call the police, but my phone wasn't working. And I couldn't just leave her alone in the park. What was I supposed to do?" Betty studied him for a long moment, then looked at Lyra. The girl's appearance was unusual, certainly, but there was something in how she looked at David with complete trust that made Betty soften. "All right, let me make some calls. In the meantime, why don't we get her set up with temporary documentation so she can attend school? We have emergency clothing donations too." What Betty didn't know was that every call she made was being subtly influenced by Queen Zariah's technology. Records appeared in databases. Forms were automatically approved. Everyone who looked into the case found perfectly reasonable explanations for why Lyra could stay temporarily with David Rodriguez while her diplomatic family dealt with complex international paperwork. By Tuesday, Lyra was enrolled in Sophie's school, wearing donated clothes that actually fit, and carrying a backpack full of supplies that David had purchased with money he really didn't have. He'd skipped breakfast himself that morning to make sure both girls had enough to eat. David's co-workers at the warehouse noticed he was more tired than usual. His second job, driving for a delivery service at night, was cutting into the sleep he wasn't getting anyway. But every evening when he came home to find Sophie and Lyra playing together, their laughter filling his small apartment, all the exhaustion seemed worth it. Queen Zariah watched it all from orbit. She watched David work double shifts. She watched him carefully divide food so the girls always had enough, even when it meant he went with less. She watched him help both children with homework he barely understood after being awake for 18 hours. She watched him fall asleep sitting up on the couch while the girls watched a movie, too exhausted to even make it to his own bed. "He's going to collapse at this rate," General Cricks observed during one of their monitoring sessions. "The human body isn't designed for this level of sustained stress." "No," Zariah agreed quietly, "but he keeps going anyway." For them, something even more remarkable was happening with Lyra. The princess, who had been raised in draconian tradition to be strong, independent and emotionally controlled, was blooming in David's care. She smiled more. She laughed, making sounds that were a mix of human giggles and musical clicks. She started speaking more English, picking it up with the quick adaptability of children. More importantly, she was teaching Sophie words in draconian. The 2 girls had developed their own little language, mixing English and draconian with made-up words that only they understood. They shared everything: toys, clothes, secrets whispered in the dark after David thought they were asleep. On Wednesday night, David came home from his warehouse shift to find a note from the school. Both girls had gotten into a confrontation with some older kids who'd been making fun of Lyra's appearance. Sophie had apparently stood in front of Lyra and told the bullies, "She's my sister and she's perfect, so shut up." David had to talk to Sophie about not using "shut up" at school, but his heart swelled with pride at her fierce protection of Lyra. And Lyra, sitting next to Sophie on the couch while David talked to them, looked at the younger girl with such pure affection that it made his eyes water. "You two are quite the team, huh?" David said, pulling them both into a hug. "We're sisters now, Daddy," Sophie declared confidently. "Right, Lyra?" Lyra nodded, her scales shimmering with that blue color again. "Sisters," she repeated carefully, and the way she said it with such wonder and happiness made David's heart ache. Thursday was the hardest day. David's car broke down on the way to work. The repair would cost money he absolutely didn't have, He had to call Betty at the community center to ask if she could pick the girls up from school, because he'd be stuck at work late trying to make up the hours. Then his boss at the delivery service called to say his performance had been slipping, and maybe he needed to reevaluate his priorities. David sat in his car in the warehouse parking lot during his lunch break, his head against the steering wheel, and for the first time in years he cried. It was all too much. He was drowning and he couldn't see a way out. But then his phone buzzed with a text from Betty, showing him a photo she'd taken of Sophie and Lyra at the community center, both girls smiling and playing with blocks together. "They're doing great," Betty's text said. "And you're doing amazing, David, don't forget that." David wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and went back to work. He could do this. He had to do this. Those girls needed him. From her ship, Queen Zariah felt something strange happening to her. She'd watched David break down in his car, watched him cry from stress and exhaustion. Any draconian in her empire would have seen that as weakness, as failure. But she didn't see weakness. She saw a man carrying more than anyone should have to carry and still refusing to give up. Still choosing to care for 2 children when he could barely care for himself. "My queen," Commander Thack said hesitantly. "Perhaps we should end this observation. The human is suffering. Princess Lyra is safe and happy, but her presence is destroying his life." "No," Zariah said sharply. "It's not Lyra destroying his life. It's the systems that leave humans like David to struggle alone. He works 2 jobs and still can't afford basic car repairs. He gives everything to his child and mine, and his society offers him nothing in return but more demands." She stood up, pacing the command deck in agitation. "Do you know what I've learned watching him this week? I've learned that humans measure strength completely wrong. They give medals to warriors and wealth to merchants. But David Rodriguez is stronger than most of the soldiers in my fleet, and they'll never know it. Because his strength isn't about conquering or defeating. It's about enduring. It's about choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. It's about loving unconditionally even when it costs everything." Her officers were silent. They'd never heard their queen speak this way before. By Friday evening, David was running on pure willpower and caffeine. But it was movie night, a tradition he'd started with Sophie after Hannah died. The girls picked an animated film about dragons, which made Lyra laugh in delight. They made popcorn. Well, David made it while the girls helped by eating half the kernels before they made it to the bowl. They all piled on the couch together, Sophie on one side of David, Lyra on the other. Halfway through the movie, both girls fell asleep leaning against him. David sat very still, not wanting to wake them, just watching their peaceful faces in the flickering light of the TV. "I don't know how I'm going to fix this," he whispered to the sleeping girls. "I don't know how to keep you both, Lyra. I don't even know where you really came from or if I'm breaking laws by having you here. But I promise I'll try. I promise I won't give up on you." Lyra stirred slightly in her sleep, instinctively snuggling closer to David. Her scales reflected the TV light in soft colors, mostly that blue shade that meant she felt safe. On the ship, Queen Zariah made her decision. She'd been putting it off all week, watching, learning, questioning everything. But now she knew what she had to do. It was unprecedented. It was against every protocol. It might even be considered treasonous by the more conservative members of her empire. But watching David sacrifice everything for her daughter, watching Lyra finally experience real love and security, watching Sophie accept an alien child as her sister without a single hesitation, the queen knew there was only one path forward. "Prepare my shuttle," she commanded. "I'm going down there." "Your Majesty, you can't be serious," General Crix protested. "Revealing yourself to the humans, it's time," Zariah interrupted. "David Rodriguez has given my daughter something I couldn't. Unconditional love. He's taught her about family, about kindness, about strength that doesn't come from weapons or conquest. And he's done it while barely surviving himself. I can't take Lyra away from that. But I also can't watch him destroy himself trying to care for both children alone." She turned to face her officers, her decision final in her eyes. "I'm going to offer him a choice. And whatever he chooses, our empire will never be the same. Because I've decided that David's way, this human way of loving without conditions or calculations, is something we desperately need to learn. And if he refuses?" Thax asked. Zariah smiled, a rare expression that transformed her fierce face. "Then he teaches me something else valuable. That some humans can't be bought or bargained with. That their integrity matters more than any reward. Either way, I learn. Either way, we all change, as she prepared to leave her. It was nearly 11 at night when David finally sat down at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going over bills by the dim light of his laptop. The numbers weren't adding up. They never did lately, but now, with Lyra to care for too, the gap between income and expenses had become a canyon. He was so focused on the spreadsheet that he didn't notice the shimmer in the air behind him. Didn't sense the advanced technology that was teleporting someone directly into his apartment. He only realized he wasn't alone when a voice spoke, deep and musical and definitely not human. David Rodriguez. David spun around so fast his chair tipped over. He stumbled backward, his heart hammering, and found himself staring at something that couldn't possibly be real. A woman, at least shaped like a woman, stood in his kitchen, but she was at least 7 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like polished amethyst in the kitchen light. Her eyes were the same striking purple as Lyra's. She wore armor that looked both ancient and futuristic, and she had a tail that moved slowly behind her like a cat's. "Please don't scream," she said calmly, raising one clawed hand. "I'm not here to harm you." "If I were, you would already be harmed." David's mouth opened and closed. His brain was refusing to process what he was seeing. "What? Who? Am I dreaming? Did I fall asleep?" "You are awake. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but subtlety seemed less kind than directness." The creature, the woman, the being, moved slightly, and David instinctively stepped back, his mind screaming danger even as his body refused to run. Running would mean leading this thing toward the girl's bedroom, and that wasn't happening. "My name is Queen Zariah," she continued, "and I am Lyra's mother." David's spinning thoughts crashed to a halt. "You're Lyra's mother?" "Yes." Zariah moved to the kitchen table and with surprising delicacy picked up the fallen chair and set it upright. "Please sit. This conversation will take some time and you are exhausted enough already." "I'll stand," David said, his voice steadier than he felt. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to think. Lyra's mother. This alien being was Lyra's mother, which meant Lyra was... She's not human. No, she is draconian, as am I. We are from a civilization far beyond your solar system. Zariah gestured to the other chair. "May I sit?" "I find human furniture surprisingly comfortable." David nodded mutely, and the queen sat, somehow making the cheap kitchen chair look like a throne. She studied him with those purple eyes, and David felt like she was seeing right through him, reading every thought and fear. "You've been watching us," David said suddenly. "The phone not working. The weird coincidences. All that time you were watching?" "Yes." Zariah didn't look apologetic. "My daughter accidentally activated an escape pod during our survey of this system. She crashed in your park. I located her quickly, but then I saw you approaching and I..." She paused, seeming to search for words. "I wanted to see what you would do. So this was all a test?" Anger cut through David's fear. "You let your daughter be scared and hungry and hurt just to test me?" "I ensured she was never in true danger," Zariah said, but there was something like shame in her voice. "The wound on her arm was superficial, healed within hours by our technology. The hunger was real, but brief. I did not intend for this to go on so long. I thought I would see what kind of being you were and retrieve her immediately. But you surprised me." Zariah leaned forward, her tail swishing behind her. "You gave her your only meal. You stayed with her when you had no obligation to do so. You brought her to authorities trying to help even when it inconvenienced you, and then when she appeared again when any reasonable being would have walked away, you brought her into your home. You've cared for her all week, sacrificing your own welfare, expecting nothing in return." David's hands clenched into fists. "She's a child. What else was I supposed to do?" "Exactly." Zariah stood suddenly, her voice passionate. "What else were you supposed to do?" "But David Rodriguez, most beings in this galaxy, including my own people, would have done something else. They would have calculated the benefit, weighed the cost, decided it wasn't their problem." She began pacing his small kitchen, her armor catching the light. "My civilization conquers star systems. We are warriors, traders, conquerors. We value strength above all else. Mercy is seen as weakness. Compassion is illogical. For 1,000 years we have built an empire on these principles." She stopped, looking at him with an intensity that made David's breath catch. "And in 1 week, you have made me question all of it." I don't understand, David said. I watched you work yourself to exhaustion for 2 children. I watched you go without food so they could eat. I watched you cry in your car because you were overwhelmed and then pull yourself together and keep going anyway. I watched you show my daughter more love in 7 days than she has received in her entire life at the palace. Zariah's voice grew softer. Do you know what draconian children are taught? They are taught that love must be earned through achievement. That affection is a reward for success. That weakness is shameful. Lyra has been trained since birth to be strong, independent, emotionally controlled. She has everything material she could want. But she has never had what you gave her this week. Unconditional love. The freedom to just be a child. David thought about Lyra's face when she laughed with Sophie. The way she'd relaxed more each day, becoming sillier, more playful, more childlike. She seemed so serious when I first found her. She was terrified and trying not to show it, as she was taught. Zariah sat back down, and now David could see sadness in her alien features. I am a good queen by draconian standards. I have expanded our territory, increased our wealth, maintained order. But watching you with Lyra, I realize I may not be a good mother. That's not, David started, but Zariah held up a hand. It is true, and it is something I must change. But first I must make you an offer, and I must be honest about what it means. She took a breath, all 3 of her hearts visible beating beneath her armor. I must return to my empire. I have duties, responsibilities, a realm to govern, and I must take Lyra with me. She is the heir to the throne. Her absence cannot be prolonged. David's heart sank. He'd known this was coming, but hearing it still hurt. I understand. She has to go home. Of course she does. But, Zariah continued, I am offering you and Sophie the choice to come with us. Time seemed to stop. David stared at her. What, come with us? Leave Earth. Join our empire. Zariah spoke quickly now, like she needed to get it all out. I can offer you things beyond imagination. Medical technology that would ensure Sophie never suffers disease or injury. Education across the stars. Wealth, security, a life without struggle. But more than that, I am asking you to help me change my civilization. Change your... How? I'm just a warehouse worker. You are a man who knows how to love without conditions, Zariah said intensely. You are a man who chooses kindness when it costs you everything. You are a man who sees a hurting child and helps, regardless of what that child looks like or where they come from. These are not small things, David Rodriguez. These are the most powerful things in the universe, and my people have forgotten them. She stood again, offering him her hand.
I want you to come to my empire and teach us what you taught me this week.
Teach us that strength can be gentle, that power can be compassionate, that love doesn't need to be earned. Help me raise Lyra to be not just a strong queen, but a good one. And in return, I promise you and Sophie a life beyond your dreams. David looked at her outstretched hand, his mind reeling. Leave Earth? Go into space? It was insane. Impossible. Completely crazy. But then he thought about Sophie and Lyra whispering secrets in their shared language. He thought about how Lyra had started calling him Papa David just yesterday. He thought about Sophie declaring them sisters with such conviction. He thought about coming home every evening to their laughter, to their joy, to a family that had somehow formed in just 1 week. If I say no, he asked quietly, then I take Lyra and leave. I will ensure you are compensated financially for your care of her. Your car will be repaired, your bills paid, your struggles eased, and you will never see either of us again. Zariah's voice was sad. And Lyra will return to a palace where she is a princess but not a child, where she has everything except what she had with you. David walked to the girl's bedroom door and opened it quietly. Sophie and Lyra were in Sophie's bed, both fast asleep, tangled together like puppies. They'd been inseparable all week. How could he tear them apart? But how could he take Sophie away from Earth, from everything she knew? Can I think about it? He asked, turning back to Zariah. It's too big to decide right now. You have until morning, Zariah said. I'm sorry, but that is all the time I can give. My fleet cannot remain in your system much longer undetected. She moved toward him, stopping a few feet away. I know what I am asking is enormous. I'm asking you to trust an alien being you just met. To leave your world for the unknown. It is perhaps too much. But David, I watched you for a week and I know your heart. You will not make this decision based on what is easy or what benefits you. You will make it based on what is best for the children. That is who you are. With that, she shimmered and vanished, leaving David alone in his kitchen with the weight of an impossible choice pressy.